Hello, scholars, and welcome back to CJ 485 Research Methods for Criminal Justice. I wanted to add an additional video to week one to help us navigate through this concept of creating a research topic and a question. And I thought if we look large scale at the process, it might help you at an individual level of creating that topic. So what I've done here is I've extracted figure 1.1, in which we find on page 13 of our text, Basics of Research Methods for Criminal Justice and Criminology. And I've taken that figure and I've created a group of bullet points here. And I'm going to talk through each one of these bullet points, and hopefully this might add a little insight or help you if you need help. But the first thing we need to do is we need to find something that interests us, some topic within criminal justice. And that's going to be key. Is this criminal justice related? And if you have trouble justifying that, it probably isn't criminal justice related. So it needs to be within that's realm of criminal justice. So where I would look is you've had a number of classes probably already in this program. If we look at some of our upper division requirements, we have classes on leadership and ethics, minorities in the criminal justice system, emergency management, information management, historical perspectives, crime and delinquencies, terrorism and homeland security, just to name a few. Somewhere along the way, you've probably had a class where there was a topic that interests you. There was a professor that presented a topic that interests you. There was a book that you read. Maybe you are going to pull something from your personal life, from your professional life, something in the news. But you need to find something that interests you, and that could be a very generalized topic. From that topic, then we need to create a research topic. Research is the key word in there. We're just not going to generalize and look at a problem. We need to understand this through the eyes of a researcher. So I'm going to give you an example and of how a researcher might look at a problem. So we understand that there is an increase in school-related shootings. It's all over the media. Some would consider it an epidemic within our nation. It's all over the place. So when I look at that, I read about it, I see it in the news on a daily, and I ask myself, why is this occurring? And that's the researcher asking that question, why? Why are there additional shootings? Why is this occurring? What are we doing about this? What can be done about this? So that's that researcher. And then I've noticed in the news a lot lately that there are, and that we know that there's these school resource officers. There's school resource officers that are at these schools, or I see school resource officers at my children's school. And I think to myself, does having a school resource officer, or why do we have that, and does that have any effect on the amount of violence, the amount of crime that occurs at that school? Is there any sort of evidence that a school that has a resource officer as opposed to a school that doesn't have a school resource officer? So right off the bat, my research topic is, school violence, and then I've narrowed that down into something that's much more manageable, of school resource officers and the effect of school resource officers on crime. So now I need to create a research question off of that. And the key is that it needs to be a question. It needs to be formulated in the form of a question. So does a school resource officer reduce crime? Very simple. Now it is in the form of a question. So each and every one of you, at some point, as you navigate through these steps, you're going to end at research questions, and it needs to be in the form of a question. So if we think about the assignments that we have here in the beginning of our course, we're going to ask you to do a problem statement. Why do we need a problem? What would be my problem statement? There's a lot of school-related violence. Because of school-related violence, the solution is to put school resource officers. There's our problem. The purpose of this study is to determine if having a school resource officer has any effect or any change on the level of crime at that given school. And then my research question would be very specific, a one-liner. Does a school resource officer reduce crime? And then that is a project, a research topic that you can then actually try to answer that question. Thinking like a researcher, you are going to hypothesize two scenarios. Your one would be as having a school officer does reduce crime. The opposite would be having a school resource officer does not reduce crime. And we are either going to create a study that's either going to accept our hypothesis or reject our hypothesis. And that's as simple as that scientific method of research works. We ask a question, we maybe determine or we guess on what we anticipate, our hypothesis, and then we're going to prove our hypothesis if it's true or not, or if we're going to accept it or reject it is the more technical terminology. The next is this word operationalization, which is difficult for me to say, I guess, right now. But what we need to do is we need to operationalize our terms in our research question. So, does a resource school officer? So I will need to define what a school resource officer is. But more importantly, there's a couple other words in here. Reduce. What does that mean? Does that mean that for a lot of us, that's very simple, a reduction from before or after, a reduction from one school district to another. A reduction is the percentages, but you'll need to tell us in your study, what do you mean by reduction? Is it going to be a percentage? Is it going to be a total number? And then the most difficult thing for you to operationalize in this question is what is going to be considered a crime? Are we going to do violent crimes? Are we going to do any crime? Does it have to be reported through the school? So that's where you're going to need to operationalize. Sometimes your questions will have something that will say, what is the effect of this program? How to describe what effect is, or how to operationalize, and this is difficult. And it's just you going through the process of telling the reader of your study, in this study, this is what reduction means. In this study, this is what crime is going to be defined as. And you just are going to write through that. And that's going to be your operationalization. And that is, we're going to find that in our methodologies portion. Then you're going to look at literature review. And remember, we're going to do an annotated bibliography. So you're now going to look through all the research. You are going to look at the research. I would probably start with the numbers of school resource officers in the U.S. Historically, I know that due to budget cuts, there's been a large reduction in the amount of school resource officers. I could get crime statistics from the number of crimes that are committed. I could find other studies that have already worked on this. That have already researched this. I can look at national levels. I can find data. I can look at similar studies where maybe the implementation of school uniforms does other alternative forms of reducing crime, were those successful? So does the school uniform policy, was that successful in reducing crime? And if that reduced crime, then maybe another implementation of a reduction program would also, or has historically this not worked? And so is this going to be a difference? Then I'm going to look at my research methods and how would I actually make this work. So you could do interviews where you're going to interview students and resource officers. I don't recommend that just because one, it's going to be very difficult to ever interview a child with consent. Second, I don't know if any prevention program is very hard to determine if it's successful or not on the qualitative side. On the quantitative side, you could definitely find a large amount of data on this, where you could compare the number of school-related crimes in an area to the number of incidents where there are school resource officers. My population and my sample, who is this going to affect? Well, my population would be that large scale. We could say that the population would be any school that either has or does not have a student resource officer. And then my sample is going to be the schools that I'm actually going to look at. So I could look at maybe 5 different schools, 5 that have a student resource officer, 5 schools that don't, and look at the distinction of crime between that. That would be my observations, and then I'm going to analyze that data and report on that data. So That would be a topic to analysis, interest to analysis for this given topic. That is how it needs to work, and you can understand that it starts with a topic. Make that topic researchable. Ask why. Turn that into a question. From that question, we need to operationalize the different segments of it. We need to look in the literature to find any existing studies that either support or don't support that are built upon, and we're going to create that annotated bibliography. We're going to create a process in which can actually pull off this research. We're going to define the large population and then the smaller group that we're actually going to look at. And then we are going to determine how we're going to observe them and how we're going to report on them. And that becomes chapters 1, 2, and 3 of our prospectus. So hopefully that helps. It helps me when I think through this process step by step. So if you have any issues, any concerns, let me know. I'm looking forward to reading through all your research topics here in week 1. And hopefully from those we can condense those into quality research questions, which will then turn into quality research perspectives. So have a blessed week. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please contact me as soon as possible. Bye for now.